A little boy says, "Hey sir, my dad has a birthmark just like yours." The billionaire is shocked. Who is this boy, and how did he recognize the birthmark? The park was alive with the sounds of laughter and conversation. Children ran freely, their giggles echoing off the paths lined with benches and trees. In the middle of this lively scene was Alex, a boy of 7, chasing after a red ball that seemed to have a mind of its own. His mother, Sarah, sat on a bench nearby, her eyes flitting between her son and the book in her lap. It was one of the rare moments she allowed herself to relax, even if her mind was always half-tethered to her responsibilities. Alex's ball rolled farther than he anticipated, bouncing lightly against the polished shoes of a man who seemed out of place in the cheerful chaos of the park. He was tall, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that contrasted sharply with the casual attire of the park's visitors. His salt and pepper hair was impeccably combed, his presence commanding without effort. Yet, his expression was distant, as though he were somewhere else entirely. "Sorry, mister," Alex called out, sprinting to retrieve his ball. He stopped short as his eyes fell on the man's hand. It wasn't the fancy watch or the sleek cufflinks that caught his attention. It was a birthmark, faint but distinct, shaped almost like a crescent moon on the man's right hand. "Hey, sir," Alex said, his voice curious and unfiltered in the way of children. "My dad has a birthmark just like yours." The man's head snapped down to look at Alex, his composed demeanor faltering for the briefest of moments. His dark eyes softened as they met the boy's. "Does he now?" he said, his voice even but laden with something Alex couldn't quite place. "Yeah," Alex said brightly, clutching his ball. "Right here on his hand. It's kinda cool." "Huh?" He turned his hand over, mimicking the man's gesture. The man's throat worked as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. He glanced over Alex's shoulder, his eyes landing on Sarah, who had noticed the interaction and was now walking toward them. She smiled politely, though her gaze lingered on the man, a flicker of recognition crossing her face before she quickly masked it. "Alex, don't bother the nice man," she said, placing a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that Alex didn't catch. "He wasn't bothering me," the man said, his tone more measured now. He looked at Sarah, his expression unreadable. "It's a rare thing, that birthmark." Sarah nodded curtly, her polite smile tightening. "Thank you for humoring him. Come on, Alex." Alex, sensing the shift in his mother's tone, obeyed without protest. He gave the man one last curious glance before turning and jogging ahead. Sarah hesitated, meeting the man's gaze again. There was something in her eyes, a mixture of caution and something deeper, almost like regret. "Thank you," she said softly, then followed her son down the path. The man stood there for a moment, rooted to the spot. His hand dropped to his side, and he flexed his fingers unconsciously, his gaze lingering on the retreating figures of the boy and his mother. He felt the weight of the boy's innocent words settle over him like a heavy fog. "My dad has a birthmark just like yours." He turned and walked toward the park's exit, his strides quick and purposeful. Yet his thoughts were anything but orderly. He hadn't expected a simple afternoon walk to dredge up memories he had spent years burying. Back at his estate, Thomas Greer poured himself a drink and sat in the silence of his study, the polished wood of the room reflecting the dim light of a single lamp. He stared at his hand, the birthmark that had always been a part of him but had never meant anything, until today. It had been years since he'd thought about Lily. She'd been a whirlwind in his otherwise structured life, her laughter and stubbornness breaking through the barriers he had built around himself. They talked about everything, from their childhoods to the future they wanted to build together. He had loved her truly, deeply, in a way he hadn't thought himself capable of. And then she was gone. No explanation, no goodbye, just a void where she had been. He had tried to find her at first, desperate to understand what had happened, but every lead turned into a dead end. Eventually, he had accepted that she didn't want to be found. But today, in the park, something had shifted. The boy's words, his birthmark, and Sarah's fleeting expression had unraveled a thread of suspicion that Thomas couldn't ignore. Could it be possible? The timing, the age of the boy, it all lined up too neatly to be a coincidence. Thomas set his glass down and reached for his phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing a number he hadn't used in years. When the gruff voice on the other end answered, Thomas leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the darkened window. "I need you to look into someone," he said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "A woman named Sarah, and her son." As he hung up, Thomas felt a strange mix of emotions swirling within him. He had built his life on control, on knowing every detail and anticipating every outcome. But this was something he couldn't plan for. He wasn't even sure what he hoped to find. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't walk away from this. Not now. The night in Thomas Greer's estate was as quiet as ever, the silence broken only by the occasional crackle of the fireplace. Yet, for the first time in years, his mind refused to settle. He paced the length of his study, the boy's words looping relentlessly in his head. "My dad has a birthmark just like yours." It was nothing more than a passing remark, an innocent observation from a child. But the moment the words left Alex's mouth, they had struck something deep inside Thomas, a long-buried ache he had worked tirelessly to suppress. He sat down at his desk, the worn leather of his chair creaking beneath him. His eyes settled on the photo frame that had stood untouched for years. In it, a younger version of himself smiled for the camera, his arm draped around a woman with wild auburn hair and a laugh that seemed to light up the entire frame. Lily. He picked up the frame, his fingers tracing the image of her face. She had been everything he hadn't known he needed, passionate, fierce, and wholly unconcerned with the trappings of his wealth. She teased him mercilessly about his obsessive work habits, insisting that life was meant to be lived, not scheduled. With her, he had felt alive in a way he hadn't before or since. The memories came unbidden, vivid as though they had happened yesterday. He could still see her sitting cross-legged on the floor of his old apartment, sketching designs for the nonprofit she dreamed of starting. He remembered the way she'd wrinkled her nose when she laughed, the sharp which she used to disarm him in every argument, and the warmth of her hand in his as they talked about building a future together. But the memory that followed was one he wished he could forget. It had been a crisp autumn morning when he woke to find her side of the bed cold. At first, he thought she'd gone out for coffee or a walk, but the silence in the apartment felt wrong. When he checked the closet, her clothes were gone. The drawer where she kept her jewelry was empty. No note, no explanation, just the echo of her absence. He'd been angry at first, furious at her for leaving without a word. Then came the worry, what if something had happened to her? But as days turned into weeks, the truth settled in like a dull ache. She had left him, and she hadn't wanted to be found. Thomas set the photo frame back on the desk, his hand trembling slightly. It had taken years to accept that she was gone, and even longer to stop looking for her in every stranger's face. But now, that restless ache was back, stronger than ever. He could still see the boy's wide, curious eyes, so full of life, and Sarah's tight-lipped smile that had seemed so familiar it was almost painful. Could it be possible? He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. Lily had been gone for nearly 8 years. He'd convinced himself long ago that she had chosen a life without him. But the timing. Alex looked no older than 7. It wasn't impossible. The thought clawed at him, refusing to be ignored. Thomas stood abruptly, crossing the room to pour himself a drink. The whiskey burned as it went down, but it did nothing to quiet his mind. If there was even a chance that Alex was his son, he needed to know. And if Sarah was Lily, if she had lied to him all these years, he clenched his fist, unsure whether he felt anger or desperation. He pulled his phone from his pocket and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed. It had been years since he'd used it, but he knew the man on the other end was as reliable as they came. "Darren," he said when the line picked up, "I need a favor." The voice on the other end was gruff but professional. "What's the job?" "There's a woman I need you to look into. Her name is Sarah, and she has a son named Alex. I'll send you a photo. Darren didn't ask questions, he never did. I'll need some time. Take what you need. And Darren. Thomas hesitated, the words sticking in his throat. Be thorough. After he hung up, he leaned against the desk, the weight of his decision settling heavily on his shoulders. He hated the thought of invading Sarah's privacy, but he couldn't let it go. Not now. Not when there was a chance, however small, that Alex was his. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the room. Thomas stared into the flames, his mind racing with possibilities. If Alex was his son, what then? Would Sarah let him be part of his life? Did he even have the right to ask after all these years? He closed his eyes, the memory of Lily's laughter washing over him like a wave. For so long, he had tried to move on, to build a life untouched by the pain of her absence. But now, it was as if the wound had been reopened, raw and unhealed. He thought of Alex's innocent smile, the way he had so casually connected the birthmark on Thomas's hand to his own father. The boy had no idea how much his simple words had unraveled. Thomas straightened, his resolve hardening. Whatever the truth was, he needed to know. If Alex was his son, he wouldn't let the boy grow up wondering about the father he'd never known. And if Sarah was Lily, he would demand answers. Answers she owed him after all these years. The fire burned low as the night deepened, but Thomas didn't sleep. Instead, he sat in his chair, staring out into the darkness and waiting for the answers that would either set him free or bind him to the past forever. Days passed, and Thomas grew more restless with each one. Darren's updates were methodical, arriving in pieces that painted a clearer picture of Sarah's life. The findings were unremarkable at first. Sarah was a single mother, working tirelessly to make ends meet. She managed a modest job at a local boutique and rented a small apartment in a neighborhood that was neither affluent nor destitute. She appeared to live for Alex, her world revolving around her son in every way. But it was the details Darren uncovered next that left Thomas uneasy. Sarah's name, as she used it now, wasn't the one she'd been born with. Before she moved to the city, she had gone by Lily Foster. The pieces fell into place with a sickening clarity. It was her. Lily, or Sarah, as she now called herself, had left his life without a word, only to reappear under a new name and identity. But why? Darren couldn't find any legal troubles or debt that might have prompted such a drastic change. And then there was Alex, the child's age, his features, and that birthmark all aligned in ways Thomas couldn't dismiss. The most painful revelation came from an innocuous note in Darren's report. According to neighbors Darren interviewed, Sarah had told Alex that his father died when he was a baby, a single sentence that sent a fresh wave of anger and confusion through Thomas. Why would she lie? Why had she cut him out so completely, robbing him of the chance to know his son? Thomas stared at the dossier Darren had compiled. The pages spread across his desk. Sarah's face, older but still achingly familiar, stared back at him from a recent photo. She looked tired, her eyes holding a weariness he didn't remember. The thought of her struggling to raise Alex alone was a strange mix of painful and infuriating. Had she truly believed she could do it all without him? Or had she simply decided that he wasn't worthy of being a part of their lives? The answers he sought wouldn't be found in reports or photographs. He needed to hear them from her directly, no matter how difficult it might be. He spent the following day preparing for the confrontation, his mind churning with questions he didn't know how to ask. By the time he arrived at the boutique where Sarah worked, his nerves were frayed, though his exterior remained calm and composed. The shop was small but charming, filled with neatly arranged racks of clothing and handmade trinkets. Thomas stepped inside, his presence immediately drawing the attention of a clerk behind the counter. It wasn't Sarah. "Can I help you?" the young woman asked, her tone polite but wary of the sharply dressed man before her. "I'm here to see Sarah," Thomas said, his voice steady. "Is she in?" The clerk hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly. "She's on her lunch break. Who should I tell her is asking?" Thomas hesitated. His name might trigger something: fear, recognition, or worse, an attempt to avoid him. "An old friend," he said finally. The clerk nodded and disappeared into the back room. Moments later, Sarah emerged, wiping her hands on a dishcloth. She froze the moment her eyes landed on him, her expression a mix of shock and disbelief. For a long, tense moment, neither of them spoke. "Thomas," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah," he replied, his tone as measured as his pounding heart would allow. She glanced back toward the counter, where her coworker pretended not to watch them. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," Thomas said. "Privately." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, he thought she might refuse. But then she nodded, motioning toward the door. "Let's go outside." They walked in silence to a nearby park, the same one where Alex had first spoken to Thomas. Sarah chose a secluded bench beneath a tree and sat, crossing her arms as though to shield herself. Thomas remained standing, unsure how to begin. "I know about Alex," he said finally. Sarah's eyes widened, and her face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" "I know he's my son," Thomas said, his voice firmer now. "The birthmark, his age, it all adds up. And then there's you. Lily Foster." She flinched at the name, as though it physically hurt to hear it. "I go by Sarah now." "Why?" Thomas demanded, unable to keep the frustration out of his voice. "Why did you leave? Why didn't you tell me about him?" Sarah looked away, her gaze fixed on the ground. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic. "Because I didn't have a choice," she said finally, her voice barely audible. Thomas stared at her, his anger simmering beneath the surface. "What does that mean?" She sighed, her shoulders slumping as though the weight of her secrets had become too much to bear. "Your father, Thomas. He found out about us, about the baby. He made it clear that I wasn't welcome in your life, and that if I stayed, he'd make sure I regretted it." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. He had always known his father was controlling, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. "That doesn't make sense," he said, though even as he spoke, doubt crept into his voice. "Why wouldn't you come to me? We could have handled it together." Sarah shook her head. "You don't understand. He was powerful, and I was just some girl you were dating. He had the resources to ruin my life, and I couldn't take that risk. Not with a baby on the way." Thomas's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You should have told me," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I had a right to know." "I know," Sarah said, her voice trembling, "and I've hated myself every day for keeping him from you. But at the time, I thought I was doing what was best for him. For both of us." Thomas turned away, his mind racing. The anger, the betrayal, and the overwhelming guilt warred within him. He had spent years resenting her for leaving, never knowing the truth about what had driven her away. "Does Alex know?" he asked finally, his voice quieter now. Sarah shook her head. "He thinks his father died when he was a baby. I couldn't bear to tell him otherwise." Thomas nodded slowly, though his heart ached at the thought of his son growing up believing a lie. "That has to change," he said. "He deserves to know the truth." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. "What are you going to do?" Thomas met her gaze, his resolve hardening. "I don't know yet, but I'm not walking away from this. From him. Not again." Thomas sat in his car outside the park long after Sarah had walked away. The conversation still echoed in his mind, each word cutting deeper than the last. Sarah Lily had left him not because she wanted to, but because she'd felt she had no choice. And it was because of his father, the same man Thomas had spent his life trying to please, unaware of the damage he had caused. The guilt felt unbearable. How could he have been so blind? He had spent years grieving Lily's absence, resenting her for disappearing. Yet he had never questioned whether his father might have been involved. He had always known his father was controlling, but this was a betrayal he hadn't expected. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He didn't just feel guilty for not searching harder for Lily. He felt angry at his father for driving her away, angry at himself for not protecting her, and angry at the years he had lost with Alex. That anger simmered as the days went on, pushing him to act. He had spent too long living in ignorance, and now that the truth was within reach, he couldn't walk away. Alex was his son, and whether Sarah liked it or not, he needed to be a part of his life. He wasn't going to let fear or guilt stop him. But as resolute as he felt, he also knew he needed to tread carefully. Sarah had built a life for herself and Alex, and her defensiveness during their conversation made it clear she wasn't ready to let him in easily. Still, he couldn't ignore the pull he felt toward Alex. The boy was bright, curious, and full of energy, a piece of himself that he hadn't even known existed until now. The next step, Thomas decided, was to see Alex again, not by chance this time, but deliberately. He needed to start building a connection, however small, before he could figure out how to be part of his son's life in the long term. Through Darren's research, Thomas learned that Alex loved books. Every Saturday, Sarah took him to a cozy independent bookstore just a few blocks from their apartment. It was a routine he could use to his advantage, though the thought of orchestrating such a meeting made him feel uneasy. He hated the idea of intruding on their lives, but he couldn't ignore the opportunity. When Saturday arrived, Thomas found himself pacing the aisle of the children's section, feeling more nervous than he had in years. He glanced at his watch, wondering if he had made a mistake. Maybe this wasn't the right time. Maybe he should wait until Sarah was ready to talk again. But before he could convince himself to leave, he heard Alex's voice, a cheerful, infectious sound that instantly put him at ease. "Mom, look at this one. It's about space dinosaurs." Thomas turned and saw Alex holding up a brightly colored book. His face lit up with excitement. Sarah stood a few steps behind him, smiling faintly as she adjusted the strap of her bag. "Space dinosaurs, huh?" Thomas said, stepping closer. "That sounds like a pretty wild adventure." Alex looked up, his eyes widening with recognition. "Hey, it's you, the guy from the park." Sarah froze, her smile vanishing as she spotted Thomas. Her expression shifted to one of guarded suspicion, her body language tense as she stepped closer to Alex. "What are you doing here?" "I was browsing," Thomas said calmly, though his heart raced at the confrontation. "And then I saw you too. I thought I'd say hello." "Hello?" Sarah replied curtly, her tone making it clear she wasn't pleased with his presence. Alex, oblivious to the tension, grinned up at Thomas. "Do you like dinosaurs too?" "I do," Thomas said, crouching slightly to meet Alex at eye level. "But I don't think I've ever read about space dinosaurs. You'll have to tell me if it's a good book." "I will," Alex said enthusiastically, holding the book close to his chest. Sarah cleared her throat, breaking the moment. "Alex, why don't you pick one more book while I talk to Mr. Greer?" "Okay," Alex said, skipping off to another shelf. Sarah's gaze hardened as she turned to Thomas. "What are you really doing here?" Thomas sighed, lowering his voice so Alex wouldn't hear. "I told you, I'm not walking away from this. From him. I know you don't trust me, and I understand why. But he's my son, Sarah. I can't ignore that." "You don't know anything about him," she shot back. "You can't just show up and expect to be part of his life." "I'm not expecting anything," Thomas said, though his voice carried a hint of desperation. "I just want to get to know him, to start somewhere." Sarah shook her head, her expression torn between frustration and something softer. "Do you have any idea how hard it was to raise him on my own? How many nights I stayed awake, wondering if I made the right choice? And now you just show up out of nowhere and act like you're entitled to a relationship with him." "I'm not entitled to anything," Thomas said, his voice steady but pained. "But I am his father, and whether you like it or not, I'm here now. I want to make up for the time I lost, even if it's too late to fix things between us." Sarah looked away, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She seemed to struggle with her emotions, torn between her instincts to protect Alex and the faint possibility that Thomas might actually mean what he said. "Alex doesn't need you," she said quietly, though her voice lacked conviction. "He's happy. He has everything he needs." "Does he?" Thomas asked softly. "Because I think he deserves to know the truth. and I think he deserves the chance to decide for himself if he wants me in his life." Sarah didn't respond, her silence stretching between them like a fragile thread. For a moment, Thomas thought she might walk away entirely, leaving him to wonder if he'd ever get the chance to prove himself. But then Alex returned, clutching a second book in his hands. "Mom, can I get this one too?" Sarah forced a smile, her hand brushing gently against Alex's shoulder. "Of course, sweetheart." Alex turned to Thomas, his eyes bright. "Are you getting any books?" "Not today," Thomas said with a small smile. "But maybe you can tell me about yours next time I see you." "Okay," Alex said, bouncing on his heels. "I'll tell you all about the space dinosaurs." As Alex ran ahead to the cashier, Sarah glanced at Thomas one last time. "This isn't over," she said quietly, her voice carrying both a warning and a hint of something else. "Hope, perhaps, or uncertainty." Thomas nodded. "I know." He watched as she followed Alex, her protective arm resting lightly on his shoulder. The sight filled him with a strange mix of longing and determination. He had a long way to go, but for the first time he felt like he had taken a step toward something he couldn't afford to lose. Thomas wasn't sure how it had happened, but over the next few weeks, his presence in Alex's life began to feel more natural. It started with brief, casual encounters orchestrated with Sarah's reluctant approval. At first, she had agreed only because Alex seemed so eager to see him again. Every visit was tense, her eyes wary as if she expected Thomas to ruin the delicate balance of their lives. But Alex's enthusiasm made it impossible for her to say no outright. Their meetings took place in neutral settings, a park, the bookstore, or the small cafe Sarah frequented. Thomas introduced himself to Alex as an old friend of his mother, a detail that Alex accepted without question. The boy was too excited about the novelty of Thomas's attention to dig deeper, and for now that was enough. Alex, with his endless curiosity and unfiltered honesty, was unlike anyone Thomas had ever met. He was a whirlwind of energy, peppering Thomas with questions about everything from his favorite childhood stories to whether he'd ever been to space. Thomas, accustomed to guarded conversations and calculated interactions, found himself caught off guard by Alex's openness. It was disarming and strangely refreshing. On one of their outings, Alex tugged at Thomas's sleeve, pointing to a chess set displayed in a shop window. "Do you know how to play?" he asked, his eyes wide with excitement. "I do," Thomas replied. "Do you?" Alex shook his head. "No, but it looks fun. Can you teach me?" Thomas smiled. "I'd be happy to." That evening, Thomas bought a chess set and brought it to their next meeting. Alex's face lit up when he saw it, and they spent hours sitting at a park bench, Thomas patiently explaining the rules while Alex fumbled with the pieces. The boys' laughter was infectious, and Thomas found himself smiling more than he had in years. Their bond grew with each passing day. Thomas was careful not to overstep, keeping their interactions light and easy, but every moment spent with Alex deepened his sense of responsibility and longing. He wanted to be more than just a friend or a passing figure in Alex's life. He wanted to be his father. Sarah, however, remained cautious. She often watched from a distance, her arms crossed as if she were holding herself back from intervening. When Alex wasn't looking, her eyes would flicker with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. Thomas could sense her struggle, though she rarely voiced it aloud. One evening, after a particularly joyful chess lesson, Sarah pulled Thomas aside as Alex ran ahead to examine a playground. "You're good with him," she admitted reluctantly, her voice low. "But it's not as simple as it looks." "I know," Thomas said, meeting her gaze, "and I don't expect it to be. But I'm trying, Sarah. For him." She sighed, her posture softening slightly. "That's what scares me. He's happy now, Thomas. He has a routine, a life that makes sense to him. If you step into that and then decide you can't handle it, it'll break him." Her words hit him hard, but he nodded, understanding the weight of her concern. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "I've missed too much already. I won't let him down." Sarah studied him for a long moment, as though searching for cracks in his resolve. Finally, she nodded, though the tension in her shoulders didn't entirely fade. Just don't make promises you can't keep. Thomas took her words to heart, his determination growing stronger. He began to notice how much Alex's joy impacted him, how the boy's laughter and curiosity seemed to fill a void he hadn't even realized was there. For years, Thomas had buried himself in work, using success and wealth to mask the loneliness that lingered in his heart. But Alex was different. He didn't care about Thomas's money or power. He cared about the stories Thomas told, the games they played, and the attention he gave. One afternoon, while they sat on a park bench, Alex turned to Thomas with a serious expression. "You're like a superhero," he said suddenly. Thomas blinked, caught off guard. "A superhero? Why do you say that?" "Because you're super smart, and you're always helping me," Alex said matter-of-factly. "And you're not like other grown-ups. You actually listen." Thomas chuckled, though his chest tightened at the boy's words. "Well, thank you, but I think you're giving me too much credit." Alex shook his head. "No way. You're the coolest grown-up ever." For a moment, Thomas couldn't speak. He felt a lump rise in his throat, and he had to swallow hard to keep his emotions in check. "Thanks, Alex. That means a lot." That night, as Thomas sat alone in his study, he found himself reflecting on Alex's words. He thought about the boy's innocence, his boundless optimism, and the trust he had so freely given. It was a trust Thomas knew he couldn't afford to break. He also thought about Sarah and the life she had built for Alex. Despite her struggles, she had managed to create a stable, loving environment for their son. It was a life Thomas admired, even if he didn't fully understand it. His wealth had always shielded him from the challenges Sarah faced daily, but now he was beginning to see the strength it took to persevere. For the first time in years, Thomas found himself questioning the choices he had made. He had spent so much time chasing success, believing it would bring him happiness. But now he realized that the things that truly mattered couldn't be bought. They were found in moments like these: quiet evenings, shared laughter, and the bonds that couldn't be measured in dollars. Thomas exhaled deeply, his resolve solidifying. He wasn't just trying to build a relationship with Alex. He was trying to rebuild himself. And for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. Thomas had known the moment would come eventually, but he had hoped for more time. The growing bond between him and Alex filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Each day spent with the boy deepened his conviction. Alex deserved to know the truth, but how to tell him without shattering the life Sarah had built was a question that haunted him. The opportunity presented itself one quiet afternoon when they were walking through the park. Alex held a small kite in his hands, one Thomas had bought after their last outing. The boy's laughter filled the air as the kite soared high, dancing against the pale blue sky. When the kite eventually fell, Alex ran to retrieve it, his cheeks flushed with excitement. He plopped down beside Thomas on a bench, the kite clutched tightly in his arms. "That was so fun," Alex exclaimed, his energy boundless. Then, after a moment, his expression grew thoughtful. "You know, you're kinda like the dad I never had." Thomas froze, his heart thudding in his chest. Alex said the words so casually, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. Thomas swallowed hard, his mind racing. He hadn't planned for this conversation to happen today, but Alex's innocent remark left him no choice. "Alex," Thomas began softly, his voice tinged with hesitation. "There's something I need to tell you." Alex turned to him, his head tilted in curiosity. "What is it?" Thomas took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I think I might be your dad." The boy's eyes widened, and he blinked in surprise. "Really? Like, for real?" "Yes," Thomas said, his voice firm but kind. "I didn't know about you until recently, but when I met you and your mom at the park, I started to realize it might be true. That's why I've been spending so much time with you. I wanted to get to know you." Alex stared at him, his young mind trying to process the weight of the revelation. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. "Does that mean I have a dad now?" Thomas's throat tightened. He hadn't expected Alex to take the news so easily, let alone with excitement. "Maybe," he said carefully, We'd need to make sure with a test. But I want you to know that I care about you no matter what. Alex grinned, his excitement bubbling over. This is so cool. Can I call you Dad? Before Thomas could answer, a voice cut through the moment like a blade. Alex, come here. Both of them turned to see Sarah standing a few feet away, her expression a mixture of shock and fury. Alex hesitated, his smile faltering as he looked between them. But, now Alex, Sarah said firmly. Alex reluctantly obeyed, dragging the kite behind him as he walked to his mother. Sarah crouched down, placing a protective arm around him. Go play over there for a bit, she said, pointing toward a nearby playground. Once Alex was out of earshot, Sarah rounded on Thomas, her eyes blazing. What the hell were you thinking? Thomas stood, his calm demeanor masking the turmoil inside. He deserves to know, Sarah. You had no right to tell him that without talking to me first, she snapped, her voice low but furious. Do you have any idea what you've just done? I didn't plan for it to happen like this, Thomas admitted, his tone steady. But he brought it up. I couldn't lie to him. Sarah shook her head, her hands clenched at her sides. You've crossed a line, Thomas. This isn't just about you. It's about Alex. You can't just waltz into his life, make these grand declarations, and expect everything to be fine. I'm not trying to disrupt his life, Thomas said, his voice rising slightly. But he's my son too. Don't you think he has a right to know the truth? And what happens if the test proves you're not his father? Sarah shot back. Do you have any idea what that kind of hope can do to a kid if it's taken away? Thomas flinched at her words, but he held his ground. If it turns out I'm not his father, I'll still be here. I've come to care about him, Sarah. I'm not going anywhere. Sarah's expression softened briefly, but it quickly hardened again. You don't get to make that decision on your own. I've been raising him for 7 years. 7 years of scraped knees, nightmares, and school projects, all without you. And now you show up, throwing money around, acting like you can just step in and fix everything. I'm not trying to buy my way into his life, Thomas said, his voice filled with frustration. I know I can't make up for the years I missed, but I can be here now, and I can prove to you that I'm serious about this. Sarah crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. Words are easy, Thomas. Prove it with actions. I will, he said firmly, but I need you to meet me halfway. Let me be part of his life. Let me show him that he has someone else who cares about him. Sarah hesitated, her walls cracking under the weight of her conflicting emotions. She looked toward Alex, who was happily playing on the swings, oblivious to the tension between the two adults. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, laced with uncertainty. If you hurt him, I won't forgive you. I won't, Thomas promised. I swear. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Sarah's gaze softened, though her caution remained. We'll talk more later, she said. But for now, don't make any more promises to him you can't keep. Thomas nodded, his resolve unshaken. He watched as Sarah walked to Alex, her protective arm around him once again. Despite the tension, there was a flicker of hope in Thomas's chest. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time he felt like they were moving forward, however cautiously, toward something better. The days following their confrontation were tense but productive. Sarah reluctantly agreed to the DNA test, though her hesitation was palpable. She was wary, guarded, and Thomas understood why. The stakes were enormous, not just for him, but for her and Alex too. Still, he couldn't suppress the flicker of hope as he accompanied Sarah and Alex to the clinic. The test itself was uneventful, a quick swab of the inside of their mouths, but the weight of what it represented hung heavily in the air. Alex, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension, treated the visit like an adventure, peppering Thomas with questions about how the test worked. Do they look at it under a big microscope? He asked, his eyes wide. Something like that, Thomas said, smiling. It's a little more complicated, but the scientists will figure it out. Cool, Alex said, grinning. I hope it says you're my dad. Then we can do more fun stuff like chess and flying kites and... Oh, can we go camping too? Thomas glanced at Sarah, whose expression was unreadable. If the test says what we think it will, Thomas said carefully, then we'll definitely plan something. Alex beamed, his excitement contagious. Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't say anything. The results came a week later. Thomas received the call in the early afternoon and felt his chest tighten as the words sank in. "It's a match," the lab technician said. "Thomas, you're the boy's biological father." He thanked them and hung up, his hands shaking slightly. For a long moment, he sat in silence, staring at the phone as the realization settled over him. Alex was his son. The connection he had felt so deeply wasn't just a figment of his imagination. It was real, and now it was undeniable. When he told Sarah, her reaction was subdued. She nodded, as though the confirmation had been inevitable. "I figured as much," she said quietly, "but hearing it makes it real. It doesn't have to change everything all at once," Thomas said gently, "but it does mean I want to be part of his life. Fully." Sarah hesitated, her gaze drifting toward Alex, who was playing with a toy car in the living room. "He's happy right now," she said, "but if you let him down..." "I won't," Thomas interrupted, his voice firm. "I know you don't trust me yet, and I don't blame you, but I'm not going anywhere. I want to be here for him, for both of you." Sarah's expression softened, but the caution in her eyes remained. "We'll see," she said finally. Thomas didn't push further. Instead, he focused on spending more time with Alex, now free to step into the role he had longed for. Alex's joy was boundless, his excitement untainted by the complexities of adult relationships. "You're my dad," he exclaimed one afternoon, flinging his arms around Thomas's waist. "This is so cool. Can we do dad stuff now?" Thomas laughed, ruffling Alex's hair. "What kind of dad stuff? Like, build a treehouse? Or, oh, you can come to my school's science fair next week. Mom always comes, but now you can too." Thomas glanced at Sarah, who stood in the doorway watching them. She gave a small nod, her expression softening for the first time. "We'll see," Thomas said, smiling down at Alex. "But I'll definitely try." The science fair became a turning point. Alex proudly introduced Thomas to his teachers and friends, beaming as he explained that this was his dad. Thomas felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a mixture of pride and gratitude. He had missed so many milestones in Alex's life, but this moment felt like a chance to start fresh. After the fair, they stopped for ice cream at Alex's insistence. Sarah sat across from Thomas at the small table, her posture still guarded but less tense than before. Alex, oblivious to the undercurrent between them, chatted animatedly about his favorite exhibits. "You should have seen the volcano," he said, his face lighting up. "It was so cool. Maybe we can build one at home. Can we, Dad?" The word "dad" hit Thomas with a bittersweet pang. He nodded, smiling. "I'd like that." Later that evening, after Alex had gone to bed, Thomas and Sarah sat in her living room, the quiet hum of the night settling around them. For the first time, Thomas felt like they were on equal footing, not as adversaries but as two people trying to do what was best for their son. "I missed so much," Thomas said, his voice low. "So many years I didn't even know I had with him. I can't get that time back, but I want to make the most of what's ahead." Sarah studied him for a long moment. "Why now?" she asked. "You have everything: money, success, freedom. Why would you want to tie yourself to this?" Thomas hesitated, the weight of her question sinking in. "Because none of that means anything without people to share it with," he admitted. "I thought I was building a life, but all I was doing was filling the emptiness." Meeting Alex changed that. He gave me something real to hold on to. Sarah's eyes softened, though she didn't respond immediately. Finally, she nodded. "He's lucky to have you," she said. "But this isn't just about him. If you're serious about being here, it means being part of both our lives." "I know," Thomas said, "and I'm willing to earn that. Over time, Alex's innocent enthusiasm began to chip away at Sarah's reservations. One evening, as they sat around the dining table playing a game of chess, Alex turned to his mother with a wide grin. "You should play too, Mom. Dad taught me all the moves." Sarah hesitated, glancing at Thomas. His expression was open, encouraging. With a small smile, she nodded and pulled up a chair. As the three of them laughed and played, the barriers between them began to feel less insurmountable. For Thomas, it wasn't just about building a relationship with Alex. It was about creating something new, a family that might never have existed without the unexpected reunion that had brought them back together. And for the first time, he dared to believe it was possible. The weeks turned into months, and a fragile rhythm settled into their lives. Thomas continued to show up, just as he had promised. He attended Alex's school events, helped him with homework, and spent countless afternoons at the park or library, fostering their bond with each passing day. He even kept up their chess games, patiently letting Alex improve until one evening the boy finally bested him. "I won!" Alex exclaimed, leaping from his chair and pumping his fists in the air. "I beat you, Dad." Thomas laughed, the sound genuine and unrestrained. "You sure did. I guess I need to practice more." Sarah, watching from the kitchen, couldn't help but smile. The joy on Alex's face was undeniable, his laughter filling their small apartment like sunlight. She hadn't intended to let Thomas become such a regular part of their lives, but his persistence and his sincerity had softened her defenses. He didn't try to control things or overstep, as she'd once feared he might. Instead, he listened, respected her boundaries, and let their new dynamic unfold naturally. Slowly but surely, Sarah began to trust him, though the scars of the past lingered. One evening, after Alex had fallen asleep on the couch during a family movie night, Sarah found herself alone with Thomas in the dimly lit living room. She watched as he carefully lifted Alex, carrying him to his room with a tenderness that surprised her. When he returned, she motioned for him to sit beside her. "You've changed," she said, her voice quiet. Thomas glanced at her, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "The man I knew before. He was different," she continued, choosing her words carefully. "You were always so focused, so driven. But now, you're patient, kind. I didn't expect that." He leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "I think I had to lose everything to realize what really mattered," he admitted. "For years, I thought success would fill the emptiness, but it didn't. Meeting Alex changed everything. He reminded me of what I've been missing." Sarah nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. "You've done more than I thought you would. For him and for me." Thomas reached out, his hand resting lightly on hers. "I want to keep doing more. For both of you, if you'll let me." She didn't pull away. Instead, she looked up, her eyes meeting his. For the first time, she allowed herself to see the man he had become. Not the man she'd left behind, but the one who had worked tirelessly to prove his love and dedication. "Maybe we can figure this out," she said softly. That quiet agreement marked a turning point. They didn't rush things. Neither of them was ready for that, but they began to build something together. It started with small moments. Shared meals, family outings, and evenings spent talking after Alex had gone to bed. Sarah opened up about the years she'd spent struggling to make ends meet, her fears of failing Alex, and her guilt over keeping Thomas in the dark. In turn, Thomas spoke about his regrets, his battles with loneliness, and his determination to be the father Alex deserved. Alex, blissfully unaware of the complexities between his parents, thrived in the newfound harmony. He started calling Thomas Dad without hesitation, the word rolling off his tongue with ease. He invited Thomas to his class's career day, proudly introducing him to his classmates as his father. "He's super smart and really good at chess," Alex told his teacher. "And he can fly kites better than anyone." Thomas chuckled at the memory as he recounted it to Sarah later that evening. "Apparently, my kite-flying skills are my most impressive trait," he said, grinning. Sarah laughed, a sound that felt warm and natural. "He adores you," she said, her voice tinged with affection. It's good for him to have you in his life. It's good for me too, Thomas admitted, his tone sincere. He's given me more than I could ever give him. As the months passed, their tentative family unit grew stronger. Thomas, once so distant and preoccupied, became a constant presence in their lives. He helped Alex build a treehouse in a friend's backyard, coached him through science projects, and even learned to cook simple meals for family dinners. Sarah marveled at the transformation, her skepticism giving way to genuine admiration. One sunny afternoon, the three of them took a trip to the beach. Alex spent hours splashing in the waves, building sandcastles, and chasing seagulls. Thomas and Sarah sat on a blanket, their conversation easy and unguarded. "Thank you," Sarah said suddenly, her voice breaking the comfortable silence. Thomas turned to her, surprised. "For what?" "For not giving up," she said, her eyes fixed on Alex as he raced along the shoreline. "I was so scared you'd hurt him or me, but you didn't. You proved me wrong." Thomas's expression softened. "I had to," he said simply. "You and Alex mean everything to me. I couldn't let fear keep me away." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw the truth in his eyes. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace, a belief that they might actually make this work. That evening, as the sun set and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, they gathered around a small bonfire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. Alex leaned against Thomas, his eyes heavy with sleep but his face glowing with contentment. "This is the best day ever," Alex murmured, his voice drowsy. Thomas smiled, wrapping an arm around his son. "I think so too." Sarah watched them, her heart full. The man she had once feared would shatter their lives had become their anchor, and the boy she had raised on her own now had the father he had always deserved. They weren't perfect, but they were a family, and for the first time in a long time that felt like enough. As the fire crackled and the stars appeared overhead, Sarah leaned into Thomas, allowing herself to hope for the future. They had come so far from where they began, and she knew there would still be challenges ahead. But in that moment, surrounded by warmth and love, she felt ready to face them together. The months that followed felt like uncharted territory for all three of them. Thomas, Sarah, and Alex were no longer just figuring out how to coexist. They were learning how to thrive together. Slowly but surely, the makeshift routines they had established began to feel less like an arrangement and more like a natural rhythm. For Alex, the changes seemed effortless. He moved seamlessly between his time with Thomas and the life he had always known with Sarah. He took every new experience in stride, whether it was helping Thomas set up an office in the spare room of their apartment or convincing him to participate in their school's Father-Son Day. "Can you come, Dad?" Alex asked one evening, his eyes wide with hope. "It's this Friday. We're going to build birdhouses." Thomas, seated at the dining table with a stack of paperwork, set his pen down immediately. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Sarah, drying dishes in the kitchen, watched the interaction with a mixture of amusement and gratitude. "He's got you wrapped around his little finger," she teased, though her tone was light. Thomas grinned. "I don't mind. He's worth it." Despite the progress they had made as a family, Sarah remained cautious about their future. She knew all too well how fragile happiness could be, and the fear of something or someone shattering what they had built never fully left her. Thomas, ever patient, didn't push her, but he also didn't shy away from reminding her that he wasn't going anywhere. One evening, as they sat on the couch after Alex had gone to bed, Thomas broached a subject they had both avoided for weeks. "I've been thinking about getting a house," he said casually, his eyes fixed on the flickering television screen. "Something nearby, so I can be close to you and Alex." Sarah's head turned sharply, her brow furrowed. "A house? Not to replace this," he clarified quickly, gesturing to the cozy apartment. "Just something bigger, with more space for Alex to run around. And maybe a yard for that dog he's been begging for." Sarah relaxed, though her expression remained skeptical. "That's a big step." "It is," Thomas agreed. "But it's not just for me. It's for us. I want Alex to feel like he has a place that's his. where he can grow up and make memories. Sarah hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. And where would that leave me? Thomas turned to face her, his gaze steady. Wherever you want to be. I'm not trying to rush you, Sarah. I just want to create something stable for Alex, and for you if you'll let me. The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard, and she looked away, unsure how to respond. Over the past year, she had seen the changes in Thomas firsthand. He wasn't the man she had left behind, and the effort he had put into rebuilding their lives together spoke volumes. Still, the scars of the past weren't easy to forget. I'll think about it, she said finally. That conversation marked a subtle shift in their dynamic. Sarah began to let herself imagine a life where they weren't just co-parenting but truly building a future together. She saw it in the way Thomas helped Alex with his math homework, his patience unmatched. She saw it in the way he quietly supported her dreams, encouraging her to take a leap of faith and open her own boutique. And she saw it in the way Alex flourished, his happiness shining through in everything he did. The turning point came on a crisp autumn day, exactly 1 year after Thomas had first met Alex. They were at a local fall festival, wandering through rows of pumpkin patches and food stalls. Alex ran ahead, clutching a caramel apple in one hand and pointing excitedly at a hayride. "Come on, Mom, Dad, it's starting," he called, his voice carrying through the crowd. Sarah and Thomas exchanged a glance, her smile softening. "He's never going to run out of energy, is he?" Thomas chuckled. "Not anytime soon." As they climbed onto the hayride, Alex wedged himself between them, chattering nonstop about his plans for Halloween. Thomas and Sarah listened, their shoulders brushing lightly as the tractor rumbled to life. For a moment, Sarah let herself relax, leaning into the warmth of the moment. She glanced at Thomas, who was watching Alex with an expression she recognized. Love, pure and unguarded. It was the same way she used to look at him, back when their lives were simpler. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the noise of the crowd. Thomas turned to her, his brow furrowed. "For what?" "For not giving up," she said, her eyes meeting his. "On him. On us." Thomas's hand brushed hers, tentative but steady. "I couldn't. You're both worth everything." The hayride ended, and Alex hopped off, already pulling them toward another activity. As they followed him, Sarah felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. It wasn't just for her or Alex, but for the three of them, together. Later that evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Alex looked up from his plate, his face serious. "Can we do this forever?" he asked. "Like, be a family?" Sarah reached across the table, taking Alex's hand in hers. "We already are," she said softly. Thomas smiled, his heart full. "And we always will be." As laughter filled the room, the weight of the past began to fade. It hadn't been an easy journey, but they had found their way back to each other. And for the first time, Thomas felt like he had everything he'd ever wanted. Not in the form of wealth or success, but in the love of a family that had become his greatest treasure. And there you have it, a story about love, redemption, and the power of family. Thomas, Sarah, and Alex's journey reminds us that even the deepest wounds can heal with time, effort, and a willingness to open our hearts. Life may throw unexpected challenges our way, but it's the connections we build and the love we nurture that truly define us. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves heartwarming tales, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire, move, and connect us all. Let us know in the comments. What part of the story resonated most with you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.